evening, everybody. I want to call the meeting of the State Finance Council to order and ask John Yeary to call the roll, please.
President Masterson?
Here.
Senator Alley? Senator Alley?
He's
Here.
probably on. Okay.
Senator Sykes?
Here.
Senator Billinger? Senator Billinger? Speaker Reichman?
Here.
Representative Hawkins?
Here.
Representative Sawyer?
Here.
Representative Waymaster?
Here.
Okay, very good. Thanks, John. Then I need somebody to make a motion to approve the minutes of the August 5th meeting.
Representative Sawyer, I move we approve the minutes.
Okay, we've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second. Masterson.
Masterson, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. All right, the only item we've got on the agenda today is the request from the Recovery Office for the approval of the Spark proposal to support frontline nurses and frontline care workers. I believe Lieutenant Governor Tolan, are you going to provide an overview?
Yes, Governor, briefly, thank you. This morning, the Spark Task Force met to review a proposal to provide support to the state's frontline healthcare workers in our hospitals statewide. And that request was approved unanimously. We have John Rolfe, who is one of the private sector members of the Spark Task Force, who is with us today and who was instrumental in developing this proposal. And so, John, would you please give the State Finance Council an overview of the mechanics of this project?
Well, I'd be glad to. Thank you very much. As far as rationale and background goes, where I'll start and then I'll move into the specifics of the proposal. As I'm sure you've read about or heard from your local communities. And first, let me say thank you all for your service to the state, and thank you for the invitation to be here. So we have a hospital capacity issue in the state of Kansas. So it's an issue across many states right now. With the latest surge of COVID around Delta. And though not everywhere the numbers are as high as the surge last October, November, December, when we hit capacity issues before, what's happening is the hospitals are busier with other activity. You might think of it much drugs, as much other things that were going on. Going on, and which creates a really activity of everything else that's going on. And so what happens in the hospital capacity generally is you really get logjam with your acute care centers, think of your large urban hospitals, which have the most tools and sophisticated instruments and specialized workforce and doctors to handle things. When they get full, then it begins to back up through the system out into the regional hospitals and into the rural hospitals. And that's what we're seeing right now. And that can be caused by one of three things. Generally, it's stuff, space, or staff. Stuff was the issue when the pandemic started. There wasn't enough PPE, there wasn't enough face masks or eye shields or gowns out there. The issue now revolves around not space, but staff. So it's not that we just need to go find a gym we can put 100 beds in and have places for people to be tended to. It really is the staff. So there's many hospitals across the state that have hospital beds available, but no one to tend to those. And that's caused by a few things, the staffing crisis. There was a nationally known nursing shortage coming for the last several years that we've seen, and the pandemic seems to have accelerated that trend. What we saw after the first wave of this last year, once they got through it, there were several frontline workers that decided to opt out after getting through that, or are opting out now that they're looking at the prospects of a second surge. And what that means is some were near retirement age and are taking early retirement, or others are choosing to move to maybe a less stressful clinical care space where it's an outpatient situation or a doctor's office or something like that, or they're just leaving altogether and going into a new profession. The other thing going on is, as we've seen this surge and this need for staff, traveling nurses have become in higher demand. And what we're seeing in some contracts, we've been able to get in this state at around $130 an hour, $140 an hour. Those same traveling nurses are being offered $230 or $250 an hour in places like Texas and Florida, who are even in a more desperate situation than what we are here. And so we're not only trying to figure out how to increase capacity as a state, we're really trying to figure out how to hold on to the capacity we have. Because you might imagine every inpatient nurse that you lose they usually cover about 6 beds. Every ICU nurse is covering about 2 beds. And so the situation's real. It's creating a lot of stress on the system. And we're beginning to see where people are waiting 2 or 3 days. I was looking at the transfer portal today from Mission Control, and there was, I think, 24 missions up, with a few having waited for several days to try and get to a more acute bed. And so certainly an issue right now here in September, expected to be, again, a continued issue through the winter. With the normal high activity in a non-pandemic year of October, November, December, January for hospitals, with any kind of COVID surge on top of that, or COVID activity really puts a strain on the system. And so I've been working with hospitals and the Hospital Association, trying to figure out, well, how do we handle the staffing situation? There's the traveling nurse situation, like I talked about, and the retention situation. It's been determined by a couple of the consultants that the state's using, that there's an opportunity with FEMA for the nonprofit hospitals to go get reimbursed for some of the COVID-related expenses around traveling nurses. So we're going to pursue that. So we've taken that off the table, and it's really about how do we retain the current frontline teams and nurses that are caring for our patients. And so what we've come up with is a system that really, to qualify for, you need to be in the general hospital category with an emergency department. And then we looked at trying to figure out a number to base a calculation off of, to figure out how much money to be able to allocate towards these hospitals that would go with the size of the hospital. And you have everything, the smallest bed, the smallest hospital in the state's 10 beds, all the way up to several hundred. And the only really reliable number that we found that's out there and reported regularly is the licensed bed number. And I know that is troubling in its own case, because what happens is you get licensed for a certain number of beds that open, and then generally you operate at some lower capacity of that afterwards, depending on what your activity is and or your staffing levels, things like that. But that generally is the most consistent number to give us the idea of the size of the hospital. And you have your licensed ICU beds and your licensed inpatient beds. And so we've created taking the licensed beds for a hospital, and we can go deeper into this calculation, but essentially trying to figure out the number of frontline workers. The nationally recognized ratios would be, you have for every 1 inpatient, for every 6 inpatient beds, you have 1 nurse. For every 2 ICU beds, you have 1 ICU nurse. And so we went through the inpatient beds and the ICU beds and did a calculation of that on those, knowing that you need 3 shifts worth of nurses to get through a day, and you needed to cover 7 days a week. And then we added a kind of a 20% on top of that number, knowing that there's more than just nurses taking care of those beds. There's a lot of other frontline workers really going above and beyond for all of us to have reliable health care in Kansas. And that gave us this number that ends up coming out to, essentially 9,800 nurses and frontline care workers in the state is our estimate. And with a roughly $5,000 retention bonus. Not that that's what would be proposed out there for each of them, but that just, again, a calculation for something that would give us the idea what the hospitals might need to work with to keep people through this time period. That got us to 49.2 million. And that got rounded up to 50 million to make sure it covered administrative costs. We discussed quite a bit on the Spark Committee that it shouldn't cost $800,000 to administer this program. Those details and the details around the guardrails are going to be discussed next week in another Spark Committee meeting. But what we determined was there is a need to address the capacity issue, to at least protect the capacity we have, to try and increase it if able, to try and protect flexibility for the hospitals and how they handle this retention problem, and to make sure we're saying loud and clear how much we appreciate these nurses, these frontline workers who are experiencing all kinds of stress, trying to make sure that if we need a hospital, whether it's for COVID or any other purpose, that there's people there that care about us, that know what they're doing and can help keep us healthy and alive. So we'll work through the guardrails. What was proposed today inside the ARPA guidelines, you are able to push, you can't push bonuses out there, but you can push a premium pay that is capped at $13 an hour and no more than $25,000 a year. So those are the numbers you see in there is kind of a cap, an up to number of $13 an hour for these nurses and frontline workers. Now, again, the idea would be the hospital would apply for the grant and then be able to push that directly into payroll and focused in the areas and the length of time that they need to make sure that in a meaningful way they're able to retain their staff, knowing where their holes are, where their needs are. And so we'll continue to work on the nuts and bolts of the process, but loud and clear, the voice of the Spark Committee was, we see a need to move quickly, and it's a need that impacts all Kansans, whether they have COVID or not. We need to make sure our hospitals are in good shape and as fully staffed as they can be. And with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
I have a question. This is Senator Laurie Alley. Are any of these nurses, are they not working due to employer mandates with the mask mandate?
That would be probably an impossible question for me to answer, knowing across the state. In all my conversations with hospitals, I can tell you I've not heard that come up one time. I mean, I think masks are generally a pretty normal issue inside of hospitals. That's visitors probably that have more of a problem with it that I've heard than actually staff around mask mandates. But we can talk with the hospital association, see if that's been an issue.
Okay, need to find that out, please.
Yeah, I got a question. This is Representative Dan Hawkins. So,
Yes,
I know. I think I know what Larry was talking about there. I think maybe a bigger problem is coming up is the fact that many of the hospitals are going to require all of their employees to have the vaccine, and I do believe this fall we're going to see an even bigger problem as those issues are implemented. You're going to see people who are going to refuse to take the vaccine. I'm not one of them. I took it. I've had both shots. So, and many of us in the legislature have taken the shots. But John, if you were to get all the emails that I get from across the state of nurses that are just absolutely fuming about the fact that they're going to have to take the vaccine or lose their job, if just a fraction of those come to be, I think we're going to have even bigger problem here soon, maybe as early as October, November of this year. So that's something that I think that we need to be thinking about. And then to add on to that, we've got just as big a problem with the hospitals. We have maybe even a bigger problem with nursing homes. Nursing homes are having just as big a problem of finding nurses. They need some help too. So I know we're just talking about hospitals, but I think that your Spark Committee probably needs to really look at what's happening in the nursing field for the nursing homes, the long-term care facilities, because when that blows up, we will literally have nursing homes shutting down. So we've got some big problems coming.
This is Senator Sykes. Thank you, John, for this information. And I just want to say thank you to the Spark Committee for addressing this situation. I know there were some of us, there was a bill introduced in the Senate, Senate Bill 289, which was, some of us thought this was going to be a problem that we had. And so better late than never. But I actually agree with Senator Hawkins that we need to also address some of those other frontline workers, because we know nurses are not the only ones who we're having issues with. But I just want to say thank you. I think this is great. Better late than never, honestly. So thank you.
I
Thank you.
might add, this is Ty, Senator Masterson, whatever you want to call me. I think, and being the maker of the motion that we took in Spark, I mean, I'm very well aware and in the concern with, I think what I'm hearing, this is why we made the motion as we did in Spark, that we want to make sure that these funds are spent in a way that the ultimate goal are to maximize the staffed, the attended beds, right? Because we even heard from our biggest hospital in Wichita that they're at 50% of their licensed beds. And so this money's intended solely for the purpose to have maximized number of staff beds, so you can therefore service the maximum number of people. And so that's why it was made in the context of looking at are there any counterproductive measures on one side? And obviously a vaccine mandate would be one of those. And are there more flexibilities? Are there other frontline service workers? What are the guidelines that we're under from the federal government on how those money are expended to maximize the flexibility of the institutions, the facilities themselves, because to meet the goal, which is to maximize the number of attended beds, because that is what in the end solves the problem, or goes towards solving the problem that we're trying to address with this. And that's why I made the motion to put this money aside and approve it in this manner. So just a little further clarification of what we went through.
This is Representative Reichman. I'd also like to add that the motion that's in front of us today that was sent was not the one that was made. We did not approve what was requested. We approved the $50 million up to $50 million. And there's a different language that I think that we can read at some point when the motion is to be made. But it wasn't just about pay. We want to allow our hospitals the flexibility to be creative and innovative. Under what our consultants came back with, of course, we didn't find this out until right before the meeting, which is a consistent frustration, not having all the data before we make a decision. But we were told that there were guardrails. Well, there's guardrails under the creative pay section of ARPA. And so we have our research team looking to see if there's more flexible ARPA money out there that's not under premium pay. There may not be, but we didn't know it existed until a few minutes before the meeting started. And so the motion basically was to appropriate up to $50 million, give the Spark a couple of days to work with the hospitals to see what's most flexible and creative ways. It may not just be paid with the ultimate goal of retaining or gaining beds in our hospitals to serve the needs of the state.
Yeah, I might add, Mr. Speaker, too. I think the most creativity with the ability to still have accountability and auditing around how it's spent on the guardrail on the other side too, as we think through this.
We also, the proposal in front of you had a 5% premium paid to a group to administer, and we didn't think it should cost $1 million. I think John mentioned 800, but the proposal, which we're real close, was up to 5%, either to go to an outside group or another consulting firm. And we believe the money that's already been allocated to the recovery office, or the amount we're spending almost $1 million a week, or excuse me, $1 million a month on consultants now, that they should be able to find a way to administer this $50 million. We hate to be in a situation where we're paying a 5% premium on the $1 billion we have. So we don't want to start the practice now.
Net effect of approving what we have in front of us today would be setting aside the 50 million for this purpose, with a little bit of work yet to be done by Spark.
This is Representative Hawkins. I'm reading the resolution and I don't see that in here. So I guess I hope the motion will be that we will be setting it aside, and you guys will go and study further action to be taken.
Representative Reichman, yeah, that's the motion that that Senator Master made. I think we have actual verbiage of what was said and not so reflected in what was sent out.
Actually, I might need to see the resolution. What I see is the motion that was made through Spark, and I don't have a copy of the resolution.
I'm looking at the resolution at this. It says approves expenditure for up to funds as presented by the council, described in the attached exhibits.
This
We
is,
just got that before the meeting, Ty.
And the attached exhibits are what was presented prior to our meeting, not the one that we actually voted on.
this is John Yeary. The governor's trying to speak, but I think has been muted, so they're working on that technical issue.
So here's the way the revisers wrote the motion.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Governor. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Sam. Sorry about that. Some ghost came in and muted me. I just want to say, I'm sorry that you all don't seem to have the current resolution in front of you, but it does read up to 50 million in ARPA. So, okay, and Clay Britton says that it should be in your emails. If you want to take a look at it, but in the third paragraph, it's very clear that it is not 50 million, it is up to 50 million.
Governor, this is Speaker Reichman. That's not the issue. The issue is the way that resolution reads is what was presented prior to the discussion, the Spark Committee. The Spark Committee changed that motion to what Senator Masterson, the motion Senator Masterson made, and Secretary Burns Wallace made the second with unanimous vote. So that's something that was sent out separate from what we sent right before the meeting. That resolution does not reflect the will of the Spark Commission.
Okay, John, Yuri, do you know, is there a more up-to-date resolution reflecting what apparently was the will of the Spark Committee?
Governor, we did not have a more up-to-date resolution. We updated to make it up to 50 million and also added the additional category of frontline care workers in addition to
Right.
frontline nurses. Understanding that I think there was some discussion that this would just be authorizing that expense, but the Spark Committee is meeting next week to talk about, I believe, the guardrails and whether or not there's additional ARPA funds outside of this group of funds that could be used for other purposes, I think.
So Senator Masterson, does that go along with your intent on the motion?
Thank you, Madam Governor. I had received a copy of the way revisers had heard my motion. So the way they pinned it, and I think it is accurate to what we had stated. And so this is the motion that was made and unanimously passed in Spark. I'll just read it to the committee. It says, prior to the and this was for the 50 million. Prior to the expenditure of such funds, the Spark Executive Committee shall reconvene to review and approve distribution of such funds, allowing hospitals flexibility in how to distribute such money, and to establish guidelines concerning facilities having access to the funds if such facility does not implement policies that are counterproductive to the goals that are trying to be accomplished. And that was the way it was. And that's what passed the committee with the idea that we are setting aside these funds and authorizing these funds, but there was some work to be done making sure we didn't have any counterproductive actions. And there was also, I think Speaker Reichman mentioned it, that there were some perceived federal guide rails about how it could be expended, and we were wanting to push some of the boundaries on those to see what was what flexibility what there was for the facilities, the hospitals themselves,
Right.
and how they expended that money to maximize our effort to man these beds.
Okay, hold on just one second. So Senator Masterson, are you comfortable with going ahead and approving this resolution, knowing that you'll be back next week with the Spark group to work on all of the other items that were in your motion, your original motion?
I think the only key that I think would need to be understood with the actions that we're doing today is that we're basically setting this money aside. We are, as a finance council, saying we want this money to go for this purpose, but to make sure that we're not authorizing this money to be spent now before Spark has addressed some of those other concerns, if that makes sense.
Okay, it does make sense. My question about that would be, would this put us in a position of the Spark group possibly coming back and rejecting the expenditure of these funds, or just that the funds could still be spent, but there would be guardrails in place?
So the motion that we did in Spark approved $50 million for this purpose.
Okay. All right, then what I would like to do is go ahead and get the approval for the up to 50 million, and then have the Spark group reconvene next week and deal with the rest of that motion.
So I would be comfortable, Madam Governor, saying I would move to approve State Finance Council's approval of the $50 million subject to the motion made and unanimously approved by the Spark Committee.
I am fine with that. Can we just amend then, or get such a motion, or consider that in a motion, Senator Masterson?
Yeah, there is actually there'll be minute language that articulates exactly what that motion was unanimously accepted. So should be no trouble translating that into the minutes of the State Finance Council, saying that we also approve the funds for that purpose, subject to that unanimous motion.
Okay. So does everyone understand what the motion is that's on the floor at the moment? Or should I have Senator Masterson repeat? Okay, if no repetition is necessary.
Governor Kelly, this is Speaker Reichman. I do think the committee should know what we're voting on. And we got to be careful that the process is laid out that the State Finance Council cannot amend these. They can say yes, no. And so, what was put in front of us for the resolution, that looked like it was drafted prior to the Spark meeting. The Spark meeting basically said that we would approve up to $50 million prior to the expenditure of such funds. The Spark Executive Committee shall reconvene to review and approve distribution of such funds, allowing hospitals flexibility in how to distribute such monies, and to establish guidelines concerning facilities having access to the funds if such facility does not implement policies that are counterproductive to the goals that are trying to be accomplished. That would be the motion that we're approving at this point.
I would second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let me check with legal to make sure this is okay.
Got a text from the Lieutenant Governor that he's stuck on mute. Also.
Yeah, I think he must be having the same problem that I had. Why don't we just hold here for a second and let's give him time to fix his technical issues, because I do think he has something he wants to add here. So we'll just stand at ease for a second.
Governor, can you hear me?
I can, Lieutenant Governor. Did you have something you wanted to add here?
Well, a couple minutes ago when we were trying to get the wording on the resolution, but I think that's been addressed. So I'm good. Thank you, Governor.
Okay, very good. All right, so we now have a motion and a second. Are there any questions
Discussion.
or discussion?
Madam Governor, Dan Hawkins.
Go ahead, Dan.
I would, I'm glad that the motion was made in the way it was. I do think it's pretty important. I've been getting some emails. I think it's pretty important when the Spark committee comes back together that they bring in somebody from the Kansas State Nurses Association for them to talk for themselves. I believe they have maybe a little bit different take than the hospitals do. And so you may want to hear from them next week when you have this further meeting. Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Okay, John, could you take the roll?
Yes. Senator Masterson?
Hold on, John Rolfe.
Yeah, John Rolfe's raising his hand. Looks like he may want to engage.
Well, I'm not a member of the Finance Council, so I just don't want to interrupt here. But as a member of Spark, and the way that was read, I know we had conversation around the idea of counterproductive policies, but I don't remember that being a part of the motion that we talked about. I think what I remember is it was being discussed that needs to be considered, but not there's no money if that is. It's sounding much more like that was decided that if a policy is determined to be counterproductive, then there's no money for that.
Well, John, this is Ty. Obviously, I mean, that was explicit in my motion, but the whole thing is subject to us having that further conversation next week. There's nothing, we talked about the timing on the payrolls and things like that, and that we would readdress, but that language was very specific to my motion.
Is your idea that there'd be further conversation, or
Yes.
that it's been determined already on what a counterproductive policy would be?
Well, that's why I used the language I did. I don't know that that's been fully determined. It's going to encompass more than what I think some are anticipating it will, or maybe less than others may say it will. But it was certainly part of what the guidelines are going to be discussed next week, along with the guidelines around the flexibility.
Okay.
But it's certainly, everything was subject, in that motion, everything was subject to that next meeting by Spark to determine some of that. We were just locking down the 50.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any other discussion, questions? Okay, John, could you now go ahead and call the roll, please?
President Masterson?
Aye.
Senator Alley?
Aye.
Senator Sykes?
Aye.
Senator Billinger? Speaker Reichman?
Aye.
Representative Hawkins?
Aye.
Representative Sawyer?
Aye.
Representative Waymaster?
Aye.
Governor Kelly?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. And with that, I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
We've got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. See you next time. Thanks, everybody.